We're at a turning point for tablets, aren't we? Everyone got really excited for them. Now they've been in decline for a few years. I would like to personally blame Microsoft for that because what they did is release tablets that are really laptops. Everyone decided to buy those because they said, these tablets are very capable, even though they're using the trackpad and keyboard all the time. Essentially just a really crappy laptop, which made people stop buying real tablets. Anywho, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. The whole tablet industry is in decline. Apple is still in the lead by quite a bit, followed by Samsung, but it doesn't do you too much good to be leading an industry that's failing. Lots of people have tons of theories on how the iPad can become, once again, a top-selling product that actually does better year to year, most of which come to the conclusion that it's all about the software. And I've seen the comment many times on my videos that the iPad should have its own independent operating system separate from the iPhone, which is iOS. They want their own iPad operating system. What would you call it? I don't know. Tablet OS? I don't know. That would make things a little complicated in the naming game for Apple, which it's already complicated. But nevertheless, we should talk about this. One point that I always mention when people bring up the iPad should have its own operating system is, doesn't it kind of already? Similarly, when Windows 10 says it runs on all platforms, phone, tablet, computer, Windows 10 Mobile, you know, the kind that runs on a phone, is so drastically different from a desktop version of Windows 10. Like, yeah, they run the same software, but is the UI and app market so drastically different that really the only thing it has in common with a desktop version of Windows 10 is the name? They just name it all the same thing. I think that's a similar argument with the iPad. We have a whole bunch of features on the iPad's version of iOS that we never get on the iPhone. Slide over in picture and split screen multitasking. And on the App Store for the iPad, it has its own dedicated section of apps that are optimized specifically for the iPad. As in, when developers make apps, they have to enable a certain other feature to make it iPad optimized. Now, of course, you can run iPhone apps on the iPad, but if you do that, it's miserable. It looks ugly, it's terrible. People typically don't like doing that. Now, a big theory for a lot of people is that if we were able to separate the iPad from iOS, developers would be more interested in making apps that are iPad specific. Because right now, when you want to make on the App Store, you very rarely make it just for the iPhone. In the most extreme example, video editing. Lots of people wouldn't be interested in buying an iPad for their pro tools because you can't do a lot of pro editing on it. There are some third-party apps out there getting some traction, but they're not really known about. So if we look at iMovie, that has to be able to run on an iPhone SE as well as an iPad Pro 12.9 inch. We're stretching that bar too far, aren't we? See, my counter to that is that I don't think iPad is lacking because it's tied to the iPhone operating system. I feel like if we were to separate it and the iPad was not attached to the iPhone, developers wouldn't have any more incentive to build apps for the iPad because now they have to code it over again like they already do. And what it really would create is more of a boundary between iPhones and iPads. Of course, they could work together just fine, but we'd have a similar kind of UI anyway. And at WWDC now we have to have watchOS, tvOS, iOS, macOS, and iPadOS. Things are already pretty complicated. Do we have to keep going? Not to mention CarOS, which is still there. Now, I do absolutely agree that if the iPad wants to make a bigger impact on the tablet market and actually turn things around, it has to be able to widen its scope, and that's more than just hardware. The new $330 iPad is really cool, but I don't think it'll turn all sales around. iPads right now are really good at killing laptop sales as long as you use your laptop for incredibly basic things. Writing emails, writing essays, like browsing social media. I mean, those stupid Apple iPad Pro ads speak for themselves. You don't get viruses on an iPad. Like, I'm an Apple sheep, but those are so cringy. What they need to do is be able to have third-party apps that can fully compete with desktop class apps. Right now, we're approaching on hardware that can compete with laptop hardware. My 12.9-inch iPad Pro is very strong in the processor game, as in it can edit up to 3 streams of 4K video, which is nice, but what I have noticed is when you do that 4K video, it has to compress it down. It can't export it at full res. A lot of this is because iPads are built so differently. You know, they don't have fans in them, far less cells in their battery, so they can't use too much power at once. And, you know, they're still limited by lightning. I don't think you could have, like with the 12-inch MacBook, even though that's not a very powerful laptop, you couldn't have the power it has in the iPad Pro because the Pro is bottlenecked by its battery life. It won't let its circuits use too much power because a tablet is supposed to have a long battery life, unlike a laptop. So while I understand what everyone's saying about giving the iPad its own dedicated operating system, I don't think that would help at all. In fact, I think that would make it worse. Developers would now have to list that their app is compatible for the iPhone only, not the iPad. And the bottom line reason most third parties are not developing advanced apps for the iPad is not because it's tied to the iPhone. It's because they know the iPad sales aren't doing super well. It's kind of like the Windows 10 death spiral. Windows 10 Mobile doesn't have a lot of third-party app support because not very many people use that phone. Why do not very many people use that phone? Because it doesn't have a lot of third-party apps. It's like, well, how do we counter this? What I think Apple needs to do this year year is get the dumb everyday consumers to get excited about an iPad again so that the sales can turn up and the third parties can say, hey, there's a lot of people demanding more advanced apps for this tablet. Let's make sure we optimize some professional apps for it that are not available on the iPhone. These are exclusive iPad Pro apps. How do you get everyday consumers excited? Well, you make it look pretty. As in, I think they're on the right track. You remove the home button, remove those bezels so it looks slick, and of course, give it unbelievable power like an A10X chip, maybe even more than that. You know, double the speed of the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, maybe give it some extra RAM, maybe even the price goes up. You might need to, but it seems this year all people care about is devices that look really pretty. So if you can make the iPad look pretty and you can sell a lot of them just on aesthetics alone, then maybe the third parties will see people are going to be buying these. Let's make sure they have stuff to run on there. It's really, really hard to turn around sales that are in this much of a steep decline. I hope they can do it, but from what I've been reading, I think they're doing the best thing possible, making things cheap as well as incredibly advanced, while still keeping that really pretty, brand new, fresh design form factor. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.